Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
Why, hello there.
So, we wanted to share some information with you guys that we've gotten through channeling and meditation, and from the guides, including the Galactics, right?
Right, we got information and this isn't the funnest stuff that I like to cover, but it's information nonetheless, and sometimes when we know what we're dealing with, we're better off.
Yeah. So, I know there's a lot of new people to the channel, right, that have been joining us just recently with everything going on. And so we want to give you what we have known and discovered and have gotten as information onto who really runs things on this planet. As we've been saying, if we're just looking at things and blaming everything on one political party in the U.S., we're really missing the point.
Right. I mean, things are not, they're not that simple. They're more convoluted. They're difficult to explain because things that we're dealing with, I mean, they might be here on Earth, but they're not human.
And if you guys have read any of David Icke's work or listened to him, we feel he's very close, although there's some things we don't agree with him on. But at the same time, there is an awful lot of truth into what he's been giving us. And Cindy is, very, very gifted in many ways, especially with her ability to connect to beings on different densities. And both her and I have had these type of encounters ever since we can remember anything, since we're kids. So we both have had interactions with what we would call discarnates, or people that are no longer in the body, and that is actually a daily occurrence for us. It's nothing to have 2 or 3 encounters a day. It's par for the course, because when your energy body gets to be of a certain vibration and frequency, it just draws these beings in. And, for those of you that can remember the old movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze, and remember Whoopi Goldberg, and all the ghosts are just sitting around her living room all the time, just like kind of like, my turn yet? My turn yet? Well, that's basically Cindy.
Yeah, it does. It really does get overwhelming. It's something that I haven't really learned how to turn it off exactly.
Yeah. And with what we do with energy work and stuff, we amplify our light. So it tends to draw more things in. So, it's one thing to theorize things. It's another when you've actually experienced them. And it's another when you've experienced them so many times it becomes countless. When we're talking about what is really going on here and who's really running this show, ultimately, many people will point to a certain group that begins with an I, has a couple L's in it, ends in an I. You guys know what I mean. And, the word itself is about shedding light. Mm-hmm. And we could look to the monarchy, and we could look to the church as well. These are kind of obvious beings that we recognize in positions of power.
Right. I mean, these beings we can look at and say, well, yeah, these look human and they're in a position of power, and we know how they function. We know how they talk. We know how they move about. We know their mannerisms. We feel like we might even be able to understand their actions and their reactions, as we are human and they are human. So we would automatically assume that we're all kind of sort of the same.
Well, there can be slight differences, yes. To put it, lightly there. But yeah, then we also have, besides that, obviously heads of state, besides heads of church, and besides the monarchy. And many of us would poo-poo and think the monarchy is just a figurehead. But in reality, when you get down to it, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the monarchy owns like 90% of the lands. It still rules. Again, it's bloodlines. Why bloodlines? Well, it's certain families. But they're not the ultimate authority. And there's different beings in between as well. Mm-hmm. Between the ultimate authorities and the perceived human leaders.
Right. And we never really went above these ones here that we see on the screen. I'm scared to even say the word, but I've never really looked too far past that, but Mike started prodding my brain a little bit to look past that. And what I found was it was yucky.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's obviously certain families tied to the banking industries as well as other industries, the top corporations, that seems like they are in control. But they report to others as well. And what we got was that there's actually a group of 8 beings that are in kind of a council on Earth. They are humanoid. They are not, if they were walking down the street, they might give some people heart attacks.
Well, yeah, they would absolutely terrify people. And these beings, they're after earthly resources and energies, and they get what they want.
So that takes us back to a lot of the Annunaki stories as well. And, it's interesting because what we got looking at the Annunaki, like I was asking to ask the Galactic Federation and the guides, how about Enlil and Enki? What's up with Enlil and Enki? Will we see them back here someday? And what we got was that, they're not any longer part of the picture at all.
No, they're not. They're not ruling the roost anymore. They've moved on to different things, we could say.
It almost sounds like they're retired when you get down to it.
That's kind of what they're showing me. Yeah.
They're sort of retired from their positions.
They're not doing anything. They're just sitting there. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're just chilling. And it's not even like Nentura or, Ninlil or any of these, or even Marduk. It's none of those beings that we are very familiar with in these legends. For those of us that have read the Sumerian writings, it's none of them. Actually, it's somebody very, very different. And again, these beings, when we're talking about Anunnaki, it's really a lot of different beings. It's kind of like, okay, so say we talk about the Galactic Federation. Well, it's not just Pleiadians. It's not just Arcturians. There's a host of different species.
There's all kinds of different species when you're working with the Galactic Federation. There's short ones. There's tall ones. There's ones that might look a little reptilian. There's some that, might look kind of like one of your household pets. They're all different kinds.
And as we know, there's a fascination with genetic material and creating new beings. And again, new beings are just new housing, so to speak, for intelligence, for consciousness. Like we occupy these bodies, but we're not just these bodies. Such as, with Cindy and I, our higher aspects of ourselves are up in 6th density. And so that's where we are trying to pull down light from that density down into this density. It's the same thing with these other beings operating on different densities.
Yeah, it is. We all sort of kind of have an MO, and ours is to pull light. We want to work for the good. These beings, they just want what they want, and they generally get it. And I don't even like looking at them. But, for the sake of understanding what we're dealing with, I do look at them so I can tell you guys.
Yeah, so if we're waiting for the return of Enlil and Enki, that doesn't look like that's going to happen. But the return of the Anunnaki can happen. Now, to keep going along those lines, the being that is in charge now is actually kind of like a humanoid feline hybrid that was created ultimately by the Draco and AI, created for its abilities, its genetic gifts.
Yes, its abilities to rule, its abilities to manipulate energy, not always for the highest good of anybody, but for, the Draco who he serves. So he's a mix. What they showed me was a being like this, but he had like some kind of paneling. He had paneling on him, almost like and he had 4 arms. So this is the being that's on the upper echelons.
As far as the Anunnaki right now,
Right.
this is the one, and again, the Anunnaki ultimately are under Draco control.
They are. Yeah, that's the sad part. That's the part that I don't like to acknowledge. But what do you do when something is? So, but yeah, this guy had 4 arms. And you could tell he was made in a way where he has just enough of a spark of source to act a certain way, have certain outcomes. But it's obvious he's manipulated.
It almost makes me wonder, do you remember we had watched the Underworld? Do you remember the hybrid vampire werewolf? Kind of like that, would you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say.
But more feline.
Yep.
More feline. And then it gets you thinking about like all the beings we see throughout history. Just look at the Sphinx, right, with the lion head. We look at Thoth, and we look at Sekhmet and other beings that are like hybridized, or they appear to be hybridized. But Cindy has gotten that's more of a technology.
Yeah, it's more of a technology. They put on these masks of different beings, and then they take on the mannerisms, and they take on the abilities of that being.
Interesting. And again, the Anunnaki ultimately, they were under draconian control. And it's all about using a planet for its resources. So I asked her, I said, so, how important to Earth is Earth to them right now? I mean, is Earth still big on their plans?
Well, it's very important. They still need the resources.
And they're still mining and doing other things. And, in effect, humanity is really still working for them without even realizing it.
Well, yeah, because there's so many mines that are open, that go in and they get the ore and they do all the work, and they get paid pennies for what this gold is worth.
And it's not just gold too, it's genetic material. Because this is a big lab, and we've all heard about the deep underground military bases with the genetic experiments going on with the extraterrestrials down there, along with our own military personnel. And, that is the reality.
And that's the aspect that I really don't like to look at. I don't like to recognize or acknowledge, but it's happening.
And it doesn't even just stop with the military. There's other corporations going on doing all sorts of genetic experimentation. They're growing human organs in pigs now. They are creating chimeras. They are doing all sorts of genetic experimentation. And, if you've ever seen Missing 411, is a great show, right? There's so many people that go missing every year, never to be seen from again. And some, unfortunately, can end up as food, literally food for some of these beings, as well as being taken away off planet in the galactic slave trade as well.
Yeah, it's really, really kind of a horrible thing. And my hope is the reason I tell people what I see or what they show me is maybe it'll bring you some kind of freedom, understanding that the network of control that we're under and we're dealing with isn't necessarily what meets the eye. And sometimes when you do recognize what you're dealing with, you're like, oh, okay, well, then, you rearrange your priorities, so to speak.
Yeah, so the 8 beings that she sees that are in this council, quite literally seated at a round table when they have their meetings, look a lot like this, minus the horns, though. The face looks a lot like this, and also they're kind of like jet black.
Yep.
With kind of fur.
Yeah, they have hairs, but the hairs are spaced apart. Like there's not a lot of fur, so you wouldn't be like petting a dog or anything. The hair is spaced apart, but it's obviously there.
Interesting. So this council of 8 that are actually literally physically on the planet in a 3D body. So you would be able to see them. And like when the world leaders went down to Antarctica, could have been a meeting with them.
They very well could have been. We're just not exactly sure what they were doing there. And, if they were, anybody who ever comes face to face with one of these beings, I feel for them.
Now, these beings are actually replaced as time goes on. Like 3 of them are up right now. You said 3 of them are coming due for
renewment, not necessarily renewment, but to be replaced.
to be replaced.
Yes.
And so the beings that will replace them do not necessarily have to come from this planet.
No, they don't have to come from this planet. There's so many different planets that we're unaware of. We are kept in the dark. We are sheltered. We're coddled. We're treated like little babies who aren't allowed to know anything. So yeah, they can be from different planets. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Different planets, different species. They are hybrids again, and they are humanoid to a degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to a degree, just enough to understand and know that they do need the resources here, and they'll do what they need to do to get them.
So, these beings are the ones that ultimately these world leaders and these families that we talk about, well, they all report to these beings, and these beings ultimately report to the Draco.
It goes back to the Draco, or what I do call something at the tip top of everything. I see this dragon and the AI, and it's merged together. So yeah,
it's like a dragon AI merging that ultimately is running the whole bad cast of characters.
We could say that, definitely. It's a pretty nasty cast.
So very interesting. We wanted to share this with you. And again, like when we're talking about different beings, they have different densities that they can move through. And so when we're talking about, well, let's just talk about, beings like Enlil and Enki, for instance. What is their natural density, and what densities can they manipulate their way into?
It really feels like they can't go much past a 4th density. They might be able to touch on a lower 5th. They can manipulate 3rd density easily.
Yeah, you could manipulate the densities below you. Yep. The limitation is where your ceiling is at. So in their case, it's more of a 4th, maybe just touching the lower aspects of 5th. And then when we're talking about those nasty looking humanoid ones that are physically here, are they just 3D, 4D?
They're 3D, 4D.
Okay, so they're 3D, 4D. And then when we talk about the Draco themselves, what is their range?
They can get up there quite a ways, and I don't understand this, but it's like 5th, 6th, they can manipulate these densities. It doesn't mean that that's what they are. They're these beautiful beings like we perceive to be on the higher densities, but they can manipulate these densities.
So they can affect them even if they can't reside in them.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And of course, so much what's going on right now, it's always been about genetic experimentation and blending these different races. I always go back to thinking about how Rome ruled. Because how did Rome learn their system of ruling? Was it really, Romulus? Or is it draconian? Because when they would take over an area, they would just basically get them to bow the knee, tax them, and enforce their will, and get their plunder. But they let the natives kind of police themselves to a fairly high degree, and that's what we see going on the planetary level.
Right, that's what we see, a lot of that going on now. So you got to wonder, where does all of this, the way that things are ruled, where exactly does that come from?
Yeah, well, it comes from these guys, which again, they're carrying out the will of that AI ultimate dragon. And, it's interesting again, because when we think about the devil, a lot of times we have these visions of something like this.
Yeah, we do. And I mean, we're brought up thinking that, well, it comes out of this particular book, and that's the only place that it comes from, and don't look outside of this book for any other information. But that's what keeps us stuck. We have to realize that information, can come from many different places, and it's what resonates with you.
Yeah, it's almost like somebody took the DNA from a T-Rex, a velociraptor, and some sort of humanoid being and merged them.
It does, and it probably is.
Yeah, sometimes reality is far crazier. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of henchmen that work for these entities. And so, we're very familiar with this because, we've had multiple interactions. And usually when you hear the sound go wonky, it's because one of these guys is interfering in our transmission. And they've actually, shut off my computers on me. They've shut the microphones off. In December of 2017, I woke up to one energetically trying to take some life force from me. And I woke up, and it was surprised I was able to wake up, and I watched it for about 90 seconds, and it just looked away from me immediately. And it sort of meditated, and it slowly just kind of faded away into an energy pattern. Very much like Beam Me Up Scotty, how it just slowly fades away and gets less and less physical. But we can push these guys away.
Yes.
Most definitely. Now, where do you see them? They're obviously operating on fourth density. They can't come down to third density. Yeah. Is that pretty much it?
Just fourth, yeah.
Yeah, so they can't go much above that. And so lately I've been having a little bit more fun when they do come around with them because we can really push them back. Yeah. And we can make it really uncomfortable for them. I actually jumped into one's energy field and it didn't like it at all.
Right. Well, we're learning that we can manipulate back. And I think that's what's been hidden from us for so long is that we feel, oh, I'm just a lowly person. I'm just sitting here. What can I do? Well, energetically, you are so powerful. You have no idea. You can do so much. And the sky is the limit if you can just expand your consciousness, get it out there and use it.
Right. As the law, one would say infinite intelligence resides within us. And some of these things are not like us. They're constructs. They've been constructed. They've been created. They have like a limited spark in them. So, we could go to a much higher level than them. It's just a matter of reclaiming our power. And they won't be able to even touch us. They won't be able to grab our bootstraps, so to speak. And then, of course, you got the little ones, which are really common and have been seen in many, many different abduction cases.
Yeah. And after I watched this movie, everything just sort of fell together for me. Then I understood. And actually, I no longer felt strange or awkward. It's like, oh, okay, well, now I know.
Yeah. And there's all different types of beings out there. And, there are, as has been rumored, so many different agreements. And unfortunately, governments have even promised people to be taken, for whatever use in exchange for technology as well, which is sad but true.
It is sad but true, but when we understand the reality of what we live in, our the cans and the can'ts, and mostly understanding our abilities are far greater than what they've told us, that helps put us in a place of empowerment.
So as we were saying right now, the whole thing with what they're doing is basically trying to assimilate. Mm-hmm. Assimilate by use of, I like using the term black goo.
Oh, yeah.
Because, and when I say that, I'm not limiting it to what I guess some people have done research-wise on black goo, but I'm meaning there's a lot of different substances that they can use to lower our frequencies.
Oh, and they do, and they attach onto our cells, and they slow that vibration of that specific cell, even down to the food that we need to eat and depend on.
Yes, and it is a good idea to bless and charge your food every time, and your water as well. Anything that you're going to drink, bless it and charge it. So at some point in time, you might see scenes like this in front of your own very eyes with all different sorts of beings, and you said this was fairly representative of the Galactic Federation.
Yeah, I mean, just look at it. You can feel the energy emanating off just this picture. Whoever painted this picture had a very accurate rendition of what was going on and how things work. And this would be a wonderful time if humanity can rise up and take control of ourselves and our destiny. Then this is what we get.
So there is most definitely hope out there, and actually, we're going to be escaping from the minions of darkness, and we just got to keep our vibes high and recognize their ploys, plots, and plans to keep us constantly fighting amongst ourselves, not recognizing who's pulling the strings ultimately. And, if you want to call it Satan, you could call it Satan. If you want to call it AI and Draco or Dragon, fine. Use whatever language you want. The reality is that these beings are real, and they are controlling the show, have been, but we are starting to slip out and above their reach.
And part of slipping out and above their reach is a recognition of they're there, to know that they're there. So then we can start to separate ourselves from it.
So, are there angels? Yeah. Are there demons? Yeah. Are there also aliens and interdimensional extraterrestrial beings? Yeah, there's all of the above. Just because there's one doesn't mean that nothing else exists. That's silly. And there's life abundantly out there. We've just been in basically a lockdown of sorts, keeping us from understanding the bigger picture.
Yep, but we're in a place now, in a time now where, we can change our belief systems, and when we hear the truth, we know the truth.
So as always, guys, make sure you're subscribed, click the bell, and thank you for your support on Ko-Fi and Patreon. Keep sending out the positive vibes. Raise your vibrations through meditation, yoga, QiGong, prayer, mantras. Everything you can do, just random acts of kindness is a beautiful thing as well, supporting each other. This is what we need more than anything right now.
Yes, I think unexpected random acts of kindness probably are the best thing on the planet.
Yes. As always, God bless and namaste.
Namaste.